It starts quietly, so quietly, no one notices. You're 7 years old, staring into the eyes of a parent who isn't really there anymore. Maybe it's the fog of addiction clouding their gaze. Maybe it's the sharp edge of anger slicing through the room. Or maybe it's the silent emptiness of someone who's too broken to show up for you at all. And in that moment, without words, without explanation, something ancient clicks inside your small mind. If I don't hold everything together, no one will. This is how a child disappears. Not physically. You're still there at the dinner table, still in the classroom, still in the family photos. But emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, you start fading. You become a ghost inside your own life. A 7-year-old shouldn't be thinking about survival, but you are. And instead of crying out, instead of demanding care, you do something far more dangerous. You adapt. You smile more. Because smiles make the adults less volatile. You cry less. Because tears bring punishment or silence. You learn to read the room before you even enter it, scanning every sigh, every slammed cabinet, every shift in tone. You learn to regulate, not just yourself, but everyone around you. You're the emotional thermostat of the household, the peacekeeper, the small adult standing in a war zone you never asked to fight in. And here's the cruel twist. The world praises you for it. Teachers call you so mature for your age. Relatives admire how responsible you are. Neighbors smile and say, "You're so strong." And every compliment feels like a pat on the back for slowly erasing yourself. No one stops to ask at what cost. This is the invisible grief of children who grew up too fast. A grief so subtle it hides beneath straight-A report cards, polite manners, and perfect performances. A grief so normalized, it follows you long after childhood ends. Because what begins as survival doesn't stay in childhood. It follows you into your relationships, into your career, into the way you measure your worth. And the tragedy, you might not even realize it. You think you're independent, hard-working, dependable, the one who always has it together. But beneath that polished surface is a child still waiting for someone, anyone, to notice how heavy the mask has become. This is why we need to talk about what psychologists call parentification, a sterile word for a brutal truth. When children are forced to care for adults instead of being cared for themselves. When the natural order is flipped upside down and little hands are asked to carry adult burdens, it doesn't just leave memories, it rewires the brain. It builds hypervigilance into your nervous system, turning calm rooms into suspicious ones, and love into a transaction you never quite trust. Think about it. You learned early that love wasn't free. Love was work. Love was fixing, soothing, sacrificing. Love was giving away your needs so that someone else could have theirs met. And when that's the lesson written into your bones before you even lose your baby teeth, how could adulthood be anything but exhausting? Stillness feels wrong. Joy feels dangerous. Rest feels like laziness. Even in your happiest moments, you're waiting for the rug to be pulled out, because dysfunction became your baseline. Chaos became your normal, and the child who once disappeared never really came back. Here's the hidden cost. The child you buried isn't gone. They're still in there, frozen in time, screaming silently. Why didn't anyone protect me? And because no one did, you built a life around control, hyper-independence, overachievement, perfectionism. You became the strong one, the capable one, the one who fixes everything. But the stronger your outer shell became, the more invisible your inner child grew. You might recognize yourself in this. Maybe you've been told you're too independent, but secretly you're terrified of depending on anyone. Maybe you struggle to enjoy joy, because happiness feels unfamiliar. Maybe you never stop working, never stop achieving, because productivity is the only way you've ever known to feel worthy. And maybe, when you're alone, you sense it, that you're still living in survival mode. And survival mode is exhausting. It keeps you alive, yes, but it also keeps you from living. That's why this isn't just a story about childhood. It's a story about right now, about the patterns that shaped you, the scars you still carry, and the invisible grief that hides behind your smile. Because until you face it, until you turn toward that buried child, you'll keep repeating the same cycle, overfunctioning, overgiving, overachieving, and wondering why peace feels so far away. So let's dive deeper. Let's go inside the psychology of the child who grew up too fast. Let's uncover what happens when a kid becomes the parent, when strength becomes a mask, and when the cost of survival becomes your identity. Because this isn't just about what you went through, it's about how it still lives inside you, silently shaping your life. And most importantly, it's about how you can finally break free. The tragedy of disappearing as a child is that no one notices. From the outside, you look fine. Better than fine. You're the kid who never causes trouble, the one who follows the rules, the one who seems wise beyond their years. But inside, you're shrinking. Not because you want to, but because every signal from your environment tells you that being fully yourself is dangerous. Think back to those early years. A slammed door becomes a warning sign. A sigh from the next room is enough to silence your laughter. You learn to scan your parents' face like a weather forecast. Is today a storm or a rare patch of calm? And you adjust yourself accordingly. If it's chaos, you become quiet. If it's rage, you become soothing. If it's despair, you become the one who tries to keep things afloat. Slowly, piece by piece, your natural self disappears. The spontaneous child, the one who wants to sing loudly, cry freely, ask for what they need, gets buried under layers of performance. You learn that your needs are risky, that asking for too much makes things worse. So you train yourself to want less. You erase your own feelings before they can inconvenience anyone else. This is the beginning of the good child mask, and the world applauds it. Teachers praise you. She's so responsible. Relatives gush. He's so polite. Classmates notice how you never make a fuss, never rock the boat. And what none of them realize is that every compliment is a confirmation that the mask is working, that disappearing is paying off. But here's the truth. No one tells you. Disappearing is not maturity, it's survival. And survival has a cost. The cost shows up in your body first. The constant tension of hyper-awareness leaves you restless. Your nervous system is always on alert, always scanning for danger. Even when you sit still, your mind is racing. You're thinking about how to prevent the next explosion, the next breakdown, the next disappointment. Relaxation feels unsafe, because in your childhood home, moments of peace were always interrupted. Then the cost shows up in your relationships. When you've been trained to disappear, you don't know how to take up space. You apologize before you've even done anything wrong. You say, "I'm fine," even when you're crumbling inside. You measure every word in case it triggers someone else. You give and give, hoping that maybe if you're good enough, responsible enough, calm enough, you'll finally earn the safety you never had. And as the years pass, disappearing becomes second nature. You don't even notice you're doing it. You step into classrooms, workplaces, friendships, and even romances carrying that same invisible rulebook. Don't be too much. Don't have needs. Keep the peace at any cost. The saddest part, people love you for it. They love your calmness, your reliability, your ability to hold everything together. But deep down, you know the truth. They don't love you. They love the version of you that learned how to disappear. And while that version keeps you safe in childhood, it starves you in adulthood. Because here's the thing, masks don't disappear when you grow up. They stick, and when you've spent years hiding your true self, eventually you start to believe the mask is who you are. But somewhere beneath it, the real you is still there. The playful, curious, messy child who once laughed too loud and asked for too much. That child never died. They just went into hiding. And if you listen closely, you can still hear them calling, still feel the ache of their absence. The disappearing child grows into an adult who struggles with authenticity. They smile when they want to cry. They agree when they want to say no. They work tirelessly to appear fine, strong, unbothered, even when they're breaking inside. And because no one ever taught them it's safe to exist without the mask, they keep disappearing long after the danger is gone. But here's the paradox. Disappearing doesn't make you invisible. It makes you hyper-visible in a different way. People notice your achievements, your strength, your stability. They rely on you, lean on you, sometimes even exploit you, and the cycle continues. Because the world rewards the disappearing child. Until one day that child, now an adult, feels the crushing emptiness of a life where they've never been fully seen. This is why the disappearing child matters, not as a sad story from the past, but as the origin point of so many adult struggles: burnout, loneliness, people-pleasing, perfectionism. If you've ever wondered why you feel exhausted even when nothing's wrong, why peace feels uncomfortable, why you long for connection but fear being truly known, this is the answer. The disappearing child still lives inside you, and until you understand their story, you'll keep repeating it. Transition. But disappearing is only the surface. Behind it is something much deeper. A complete reversal of roles that psychologists call parentification, and that's where the real rewiring begins. Psychologists have a word for what happens when children are forced to take on the roles of adults. It sounds clinical, almost cold, but its reality is anything but. The word is parentification, and behind that sterile term is a devastating truth. When the natural order is flipped, when a child becomes the caregiver instead of the one being cared for, it doesn't just change their childhood, it changes their entire life. Parentification happens when a child carries responsibilities that are too heavy for their age. Sometimes it's practical. Cooking meals, taking care of younger siblings, making sure bills get paid. But more often it's emotional. Being the therapist, the mediator, the peacekeeper, the one who absorbs all the tension in the house. On the surface, it can look like maturity, but beneath the surface, it's trauma disguised as responsibility. Think about what that does to a young brain. Childhood is meant to be a time when your nervous system learns safety through play, exploration, and guidance. But when you're parentified, your brain gets wired for danger instead. You learn that your survival depends on controlling the emotional temperature of the room. You become a master of scanning faces, tone of voice, even the heaviness of footsteps. It's called hypervigilance. And while it may have saved you then, it chains you to anxiety now. Every child needs to feel protected, but a parentified child learns the opposite lesson. You are the protector. You don't get to fall apart. You don't get to be weak. You don't even get to be a child. You step into adult shoes before your mind and body are anywhere near ready to wear them. And the worst part, you believe it's your fault if things fall apart. This is the twisted logic of parentification. If I'm good enough, if I take care of everyone, maybe everything will finally be okay. And so you take on burdens far heavier than you can carry, convincing yourself that your love, your effort, your silence can fix the chaos around you. But chaos never ends just because a child sacrifices themselves. Instead, the sacrifice becomes the pattern. And here's the cruel trick society plays. It rewards parentified children. Teachers praise your responsibility. Adults admire how mature you are. Even your broken parents may lean on you with gratitude, saying things like, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And as a child, you don't realize that this praise is actually confirmation of your erasure, because what they're really saying is, "Thank you for disappearing so I don't have to step up." Over time, the mask of the good child hardens. You become the quiet achiever, the one who never causes problems, the one who's always there for others. Friends confide in you because you're such a good listener. Coworkers trust you because you're dependable. Romantic partners see you as stable, steady, reliable. But what they don't see, and what you often don't even see yourself, is that beneath that reliability is a deep ache, an abandoned child who never got to be cared for. Parentification isn't just a psychological concept, it's a theft. It steals your right to play, your right to rest, your right to be messy and needy and unapologetically young. It forces you to rehearse adulthood while you're still in the sandbox. And the rehearsal never ends. It just becomes your life. But here's the dangerous illusion. Parentified children look like they're thriving. They're often high achievers. They're often admired. They can excel in school, in careers, in relationships. But all of that success rests on a shaky foundation. The belief that their worth is tied to what they can do for others. That if they stop performing, if they stop holding it all together, everything will collapse. And so, even as adults, they can't stop. They overfunction in relationships, always giving, always managing, always fixing. They overwork in their careers, confusing exhaustion with success. They struggle to rest, because rest feels like negligence. They don't ask for help, because needing anything feels like weakness. That's the lifelong consequence of parentification. You become a caretaker without ever having been cared for. You become strong at the expense of softness. You learn to hold everything together while quietly falling apart inside. And perhaps the cruelest part, you wear the mask so convincingly that even you forget it's a mask. You look at your own life, your achievements, your independence, your stability, and you tell yourself, "I turned out fine." But fine is a disguise. Fine is the word you use when you don't want anyone to see the fractures beneath the surface. Parentification doesn't vanish when you grow up. It just evolves. It follows you into every friendship, every romance, every workplace. It whispers the same message over and over. Your needs don't matter, only theirs do. And as long as you listen, you remain trapped in the same cycle that began when you were just a child trying to survive. Transition, but beneath the polished mask of the good child, there's someone you've forgotten. Someone who never stopped aching. The inner child you buried, and they're still waiting to be seen. Behind every mask of maturity, behind every polished exterior of the good child, there's a voice you've been trying not to hear. It's small, fragile, but relentless. It's the inner child you buried. The one who once believed it was safe to cry, to ask, to laugh without consequence. You silenced them to survive, but they never disappeared. They've been waiting in the shadows, whispering the same painful question, "Why didn't anyone protect me?" This inner child carries grief that no one ever acknowledged. The birthdays where no one showed up. The nights you cried yourself to sleep, hoping someone would come. The endless times you comforted others while secretly longing for someone to comfort you. None of that pain vanished. It simply got pushed underground. And like any buried seed, it grows in silence until it pushes through the cracks of your adult life. How does that buried child make themselves known? Through symptoms that don't look like childhood pain at first. Maybe you become hyper-independent, refusing help from anyone. because deep down you believe help will never come. Maybe you find yourself pushing people away, sabotaging relationships because intimacy feels too unsafe. Maybe joy feels strange, even threatening, because you never learned how to relax into it without fear it would be taken away. You might even find yourself numb in moments that should feel happy. A wedding, a birthday, a big achievement, and instead of joy, you feel emptiness. Why? Because your nervous system doesn't know what to do with happiness. It's uncharted territory. Love feels like a loan you'll have to repay. Peace feels suspicious, like the calm before a storm. Even rest feels dangerous, as though the moment you let your guard down, everything will collapse. This is the adult life of a buried child. Outwardly successful, inwardly aching, functioning, but not living, smiling but not feeling, surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. And perhaps the hardest truth, you don't always realize it's happening, because survival mode feels normal. When it's all you've ever known, dysfunction became your baseline. Walking on eggshells became your natural rhythm. So when life is finally calm, your body rebels. Stillness feels wrong. Peace feels eerie. You start to self-sabotage, not because you want chaos, but because chaos feels familiar. That's the invisible influence of the hidden inner child. They don't scream in words. You'd never allow that. Instead, they tug at your life through patterns. You overachieve, not because you love winning, but because achievement is the only way you've ever earned love. You stay silent in conflict, not because you're calm, but because you learned early that your voice could set off an explosion. You take care of everyone else, not because you're selfless, but because giving has always been safer than asking. And when you finally pause long enough to hear it, you realize the truth: your inner child isn't gone. They're still in there, waiting for you to finally turn toward them, acknowledge their pain, and say what no one else ever did. You didn't deserve this. You were just a child. I see you. I hear you. And I'm not leaving. But before that moment of reparenting comes, most of us do the opposite. We double down on the mask. We silence the inner child even more. We tell ourselves, it wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. I turned out fine. We gaslight ourselves into believing our suffering doesn't count. And in doing so, we abandon the child all over again. The irony: that buried child is the part of you still driving the bus. The overachiever in you is that child desperate to earn safety. The caretaker in you is that child hoping that if they fix everyone else, maybe someone will finally fix them. Even your independence, your strength, your perfectionism, they're not personality traits, they're survival strategies, carried over from a time when you had no choice. But now, as an adult, you do have a choice. You can keep burying that child, or you can go back, open the door you've kept locked for years, and finally sit with them. It's terrifying, yes, because it means facing the grief you've been outrunning your entire life. But it's also the first step to becoming whole. And here's the hopeful part. The hidden child isn't just pain. They're also your joy, your creativity, your spontaneity, your ability to feel deeply. When you reconnect with them, you don't just heal wounds, you reclaim the parts of yourself you thought were gone forever. Transition. But to understand why children bury themselves so deeply, we have to ask the question no one wants to face. Why would any child willingly sacrifice their needs, their authenticity, their very self? The answer lies in something primal: our need for attachment. Why would any child willingly erase themselves? Why would a little boy or girl, whose only job should be to play and grow, suddenly step into the role of caregiver, peacemaker, or protector? On the surface, it doesn't make sense. But when you understand human psychology, it becomes painfully clear. The answer is simple. Children will do anything for attachment. Attachment isn't optional. It's survival. A child can live without toys, without treats, even without consistent comfort, but they cannot survive without some bond to their caregiver. The brain knows this on a primal level. So when safety is absent, when chaos replaces nurture, the child's instincts kick in. If my needs are too much, I'll get rid of them. If my voice causes trouble, I'll silence it. If my parent can't take care of me, then I'll take care of them. It's not a conscious decision. It's biological. The child's body and brain are wired to prioritize belonging over authenticity. That means you will betray yourself before you ever betray the relationship. Because in the mind of a child, abandonment equals death. Losing connection to your parent feels more dangerous than losing connection to yourself. So you learn to sacrifice. You trade truth for safety. You trade play for responsibility. You trade tears for silence. You learn that the quickest way to keep love flawed as it is to erase yourself and meet the needs of others. And here's the heartbreaking part. You do it well, too well. You become the soothing presence, the little adult, the problem solver. You anticipate moods before they explode. You fix what isn't yours to fix. You bend, you contort, you disappear, all for the hope that someone will stay. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. That's instinct doing its job. The tragedy is that what saves you in childhood becomes the very thing that imprisons you in adulthood. Think about how this plays out later in life. You become hyper-independent, refusing to lean on anyone because leaning feels dangerous. You overfunction in relationships, always doing more, always giving more, because somewhere inside you still believe love must be earned. You mistake exhaustion for success because productivity was the only thing that ever made you feel worthy. Even your boundaries get twisted. Saying no feels like betrayal. Asking for help feels like selfishness. Needing rest feels like laziness. Because as a child, those were the exact messages written into your nervous system. Their needs first, your needs last, or else. This is why so many adults who grew up too fast walk through life carrying invisible grief. On the outside, they're strong, capable, dependable, but inside, they're starving. Starving for permission to rest, starving for love that doesn't require performance, starving for the chance to finally be vulnerable without fear of rejection. But because they were trained to abandon themselves, they don't even recognize the hunger. They just feel the emptiness, the restlessness, the constant low-level anxiety of never being enough. The cruel irony is this: the child's sacrifice doesn't fix the parent. No matter how much you soothe, no matter how perfectly you behave, no matter how many pieces you hold together, it's never enough to heal the brokenness of the adult. And yet, as a child, you believe it's your failure when things don't improve. You carry shame that never belonged to you. You internalize guilt that was never yours to hold. So you grow up believing you're flawed, believing you're not lovable unless you're useful, believing that if you stop performing, everything will fall apart. And here's the generational danger. Unless you face it, the sacrifice repeats. You end up passing those same patterns to your children. Not because you want to, but because unhealed wounds bleed into everything we touch. But here's the turning point. Once you recognize the pattern for what it is, once you see that sacrificing yourself was survival, not identity, you unlock the possibility of change. You realize that the little boy or girl inside you was never weak, never broken. They were brilliant. They adapted to impossible circumstances with the only tool they had themselves. And now, as an adult, you have what that child never did: choice. You can keep disappearing. You can keep overgiving, overworking, overfunctioning, or you can finally pause, turn inward, and say to that child, "You don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to be loved. You get to exist as you are." That shift from survival to authenticity is the very essence of healing. But it's not easy, because when you've lived your whole life in sacrifice, authenticity feels like danger, and yet it's the only way to truly be free. Transition, and this is where the patterns reveal their full weight, because the sacrifices made in childhood, they ripple into every corner of adult life, shaping relationships, careers, and even how you see yourself. The story doesn't end when childhood does. The sacrifices, the masks, the survival strategies, those don't just disappear when you grow up. They come with you. They bleed into every corner of your adult life. And the cruelest part, you don't always realize it. You think you're just responsible. You think you're just independent. You think you're just hardworking. But beneath those respectable labels is something else entirely, the shadow of a child who never got to be a child. Let's start with relationships. On the surface, you might seem like the perfect partner. Steady, reliable, caring. But under the surface, trust feels like walking a tightrope. Softness feels dangerous. Vulnerability feels like exposure. You love deeply, but you love with one eye open, waiting for the ground to shake beneath you. And because you're so used to giving, you struggle to receive. Compliments make you flinch. Acts of care make you uneasy. Somewhere inside, you're still asking, what will this cost me? What do I owe in return? In friendships, you become the therapist, the one everyone turns to when they're hurting, the one who listens patiently, offers advice, holds space, and you're good at it. Too good. Because it's a role you rehearsed your whole childhood. But here's the truth. Being everyone's rock often leaves you crumbling in silence. You hold others so well that no one ever thinks to ask, who's holding you? In your career, the same pattern plays out. You overachieve. You push harder than anyone else. You confuse exhaustion with success. Every project, every promotion, every accolade feels less like a triumph and more like proof that you're worthy of existing. You don't rest because rest feels like failure. You don't slow down because stillness feels unsafe. Work becomes not just what you do, it becomes who you are. And boundaries. For a child who grew up parentified, boundaries feel like betrayal. Saying no feels like letting someone down. Asking for space feels selfish. So you say yes when you mean no. You overextend. You take on more than you can handle. And when resentment builds, you turn it inward, blaming yourself for not being strong enough. All of these adult struggles trace back to one core belief you learned as a child. My needs don't matter. And so, as an adult, you live like they still don't. You hide your pain. You minimize your exhaustion. You laugh off your loneliness. And the world rewards you for it. Bosses admire your work ethic. Friends praise your loyalty. Partners appreciate your steadiness. No one sees that all this strength is just a mask for an aching child inside. But here's the devastating cycle. The world keeps rewarding the mask, and so you keep wearing it. And the longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to take off. Until one day you look at your own life, your achievements, your relationships, your reputation, and feel the emptiness underneath. You've built a life where everyone counts on you, but no one truly sees you. And in your quiet moments, it hits you. You're still disappearing, not because your parents demand it anymore, but because the pattern is written into your bones. Maybe you've noticed this in yourself. Maybe you're the one who apologizes for crying. even when your tears are justified. Maybe you're the one who downplays compliments, shrugging them off because they feel undeserved. Maybe you're the one who mistakes constant busyness for meaning, unable to sit still without feeling worthless. These aren't random quirks. They're survival echoes, and they come at a cost. Because when you spend your whole life disappearing, you eventually forget what it feels like to be real. But here's the truth no one told you. These patterns are not who you are. They are who you became to survive. They are strategies, not identities, and anything learned can be unlearned. The challenge is this: before you can change, you have to see the pattern clearly. You have to admit the cost of growing up too fast. You have to acknowledge that being strong has left you broken in invisible ways. And that's where the shift begins. When you stop idolizing your strength and start honoring your wounds. When you stop calling exhaustion success and start calling it what it is, survival on autopilot. When you stop pretending you don't have needs and start daring to meet them. But how? How do you take a lifetime of disappearing and start to come back into yourself? The answer isn't fixing. It isn't pretending it never happened. It isn't covering the pain with positivity. The first step is far simpler and far harder. The first step is witnessing. Transition, because until you turn toward the pain, until you sit with the grief you buried, you'll keep gaslighting yourself into silence. And healing starts not with denial, but with acknowledgement. Healing doesn't begin with fixing. It doesn't begin with mantras or forced positivity or trying to erase the past. Healing begins with something much simpler and much more brutal. It begins with witnessing. Because for years, maybe decades, you've been gaslighting yourself. You've said things like, "It wasn't that bad." You've compared yourself to others and whispered, "Other people had it worse." You've shrugged and muttered, "I turned out fine." But those aren't truths, they're defenses. They're the walls you've built around pain too heavy to face, and those walls keep you stuck. The reality is this: you didn't turn out fine. You turned out functional. You turned out responsible. You turned out successful. Maybe, but fine. Fine is just the mask. Underneath, the child you buried is still carrying grief, still aching, still waiting for someone to finally acknowledge what happened. And that's where witnessing comes in. Witnessing means daring to tell the truth about your own story. It means saying out loud, or even just to yourself, what really happened, that your needs were neglected, that you were asked to carry more than any child should, that your sadness, your anger, your confusion were dismissed or ignored, that you disappeared not because you wanted to, but because you had to. It's not about blame. It's not about demonizing your parents or caretakers. It's about finally validating the reality you've been minimizing for years. Because until you validate it, you'll keep invalidating yourself. This is where shadow work begins. Shadow work isn't glamorous. It's not a trendy word for journaling or quick self-help hacks. Shadow work is the process of turning toward the parts of yourself you've hidden. The rage, the grief, the unmet needs, the shame, and finally saying, "I see you. I won't abandon you again." It asks you to sit in the pain you've been running from, to let yourself feel the sorrow of birthdays no one celebrated, to cry for the innocence you lost while trying to protect people who should have protected you, to rage at the unfairness of being forced to carry what was never yours to carry. It asks you to let the tears you silenced finally fall. And here's the paradox, that grief isn't weakness. It's proof you're healing. 'Cause what was once frozen is finally thawing. What was once buried is finally being seen. The process is messy. Some days you'll feel like a child again, raw, needy, emotional. And that's not regression. That's restoration. That's the inner child finally having space to exist. Other days, you'll feel numb, as though your system can't process it all at once. That's normal too. Healing doesn't happen in straight lines. It happens in waves. But as you witness yourself, something begins to shift. You start to separate your identity from your coping mechanisms. You realize that perfectionism isn't who you are. It's what you learned. That caretaking isn't your nature. It's your training. That disappearing isn't your destiny. It was your survival. And slowly, a new question begins to emerge. If I'm not just the strong one, not just the caretaker, not just the achiever, then who am I? That question is terrifying, because it means stepping into the unknown, but it's also liberating, because it means you get to begin again. Healing requires slowing down, and that feels foreign at first. When your whole life has been defined by hypervigilance and busyness, stillness feels wrong. Rest feels dangerous. Joy feels suspicious. But with time, you start to realize that these feelings are not warnings. They're withdrawals. Withdrawals from a lifetime of survival mode. And here's what's most important. You don't heal by pretending your wounds don't exist. You heal by integrating them, by allowing your grief and your joy to exist side by side, by holding your strength and your softness together, by realizing that being human means being both resilient and vulnerable. This is the shift from surviving to living. It's not quick, it's not easy, but it's real. Because healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before you disappeared. It's about reconnecting with the child who once laughed too loud, asked for too much, and loved without fear. It's about letting that child finally exist, not as a ghost in your past, but as a living part of your present. Transition. Fun. But to bring that child back into your life, you can't just witness their pain. You have to actively care for them. And that's where reparenting begins. Learning to give yourself the very things you needed back then, but never received. Once you've faced the truth of what happened, once you've dared to witness the grief you've carried in silence, the next step is not about erasing the past. It's about repairing it. And that repair doesn't come from the people who hurt you. It doesn't come from your parents suddenly apologizing, or from someone swooping in to give you the childhood you never had. The repair comes from you. This is what psychologists and trauma experts call reparenting. It means becoming for yourself what you needed most as a child. It means learning to give yourself the love, protection, and validation that were absent back then. It means finally saying to your inner child, "I will take care of you now. I will not abandon you again." At first, reparenting feels strange, even ridiculous. Talking to a younger version of yourself, asking them what they need. It might sound absurd, but the truth is that child is still alive inside you. They've been influencing your life all along, through your patterns, your triggers, your fears. Reparenting simply means bringing them into the light and giving them what they've been silently screaming for. So, how do you do it? You start by asking a simple question. What did I need back then that I never got? The answers often sound heartbreakingly simple. I needed someone to tell me it wasn't my fault. I needed someone to notice when I was sad. I needed to rest without being called lazy. I needed to play without fear. I needed to know I was loved even when I wasn't perfect. When you hear those answers, something clicks. You realize the unmet needs of your childhood have been driving your adulthood. You've been chasing recognition because you never got it. You've been overachieving because you learned love was conditional. You've been terrified of rest because it once felt unsafe. And slowly you begin to change the pattern. You start to give yourself what you needed then. Now, you let yourself rest without guilt. You set boundaries without apologizing. You practice receiving care without flinching. You remind yourself daily, "It wasn't my fault. I was just a child." This isn't about coddling yourself. It's about restoring balance, because reparenting doesn't mean living forever in your wounds. It means finally providing the safety your younger self never had, so you can stop repeating the cycle of self-abandonment. And here's where it gets powerful. As you reparent yourself, you stop seeking parents in your partners, your friends, your bosses. You stop looking for someone else to fill the void. Instead, you become the anchor you always needed. Imagine what happens when you no longer confuse anxiety for intuition, when you no longer mistake exhaustion for worth, when you no longer tolerate relationships where you give endlessly and receive nothing. That's the fruit of reparenting. It doesn't erase your past, but it prevents your past from running your future. Of course, the process is messy. Sometimes, reparenting feels like two versions of you are at war. The adult in you wants to keep pushing, keep performing, keep surviving. The child in you just wants to rest, to play, to cry. And some days, you'll feel like you're choosing wrong no matter what you do. That's normal. Healing always feels disorienting at first. But over time, the balance shifts. You begin to trust softness. You begin to find joy in small things. You begin to let others in without fear that love will vanish if you show your flaws. You begin to rebuild your life not around survival, but around truth. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Reparenting is the act of facing your soul. It's confronting the abandoned, the ashamed, the angry parts of yourself, and choosing to love them anyway. This is how the cycle breaks. This is how the invisible grief finally begins to heal. You stop passing it down. You stop repeating it in your relationships. You stop abandoning yourself in the same way others once abandoned you. And here's the most hopeful part. When you reparent yourself, you don't just heal the past, you reshape the future. You create a life where authenticity replaces performance, where boundaries replace self-erasure, where love is free instead of transactional. You create a foundation not of fear, but of trust. Transition, and once you reclaim that inner child, once you start to build safety from the inside out, you discover something incredible. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before fear taught you to hide, before silence became safer than truth, before responsibility replaced play, before strength was the only option you had. Healing is not reinvention, it's reclamation. For so long you've believed your maturity was who you are, that your independence, your caretaking, your relentless work ethic defined you. But those were never your true identity. They were armor, they were strategies, they were survival. And survival is not the same as living. When you finally peel back the armor, when you finally sit with the child you buried, you realize something profound. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not defined by the roles you were forced into. You are simply someone who adapted brilliantly to impossible circumstances. And now, as an adult, you get to choose differently. Choice. That's the difference between then and now. As a child, you had no choice. You had to disappear. You had to perform. You had to sacrifice. But now you do. You can choose to rest without guilt. You can choose to set boundaries without apology. You can choose to stop managing everyone else's emotions and start honoring your own. This doesn't mean you'll never struggle again. Healing isn't about perfection, it's about presence. It's about choosing again and again to turn toward yourself instead of away. It's about noticing when the old patterns creep in, The people-pleasing, the overworking, the disappearing, and gently reminding yourself that was survival then. It's not necessary now. And yes, there will be days you feel like a child again. Days where the grief floods in, where the anger feels overwhelming, where you wonder if you're backsliding, but that's not regression. That's integration. That's the part of you that was silenced, finally finding its voice. Let that child cry. Let them play. Let them be seen. Because every time you do, you chip away at the illusion that you had to be strong to be loved. This is what true growth looks like. Not a glossy transformation, not a curated version of healing that pretends everything is fine, but a raw, honest reclamation of self. Growth means letting yourself be human again. Messy, emotional, imperfect, alive. And maybe for the first time, you'll realize something you've never been told. Your softness is not weakness. Your rest is not laziness. Your needs are not burdens. Your truth is not too much. They are the very things that make you whole. Think about the future from this perspective. Imagine walking into relationships where you don't have to earn love by giving endlessly. Imagine friendships where you can both support others and be supported in return. Imagine a career where success isn't measured by how exhausted you are, but by how aligned you feel. Imagine waking up and knowing you don't have to perform to be worthy of existing. That's the future available to you. A future not built on survival, but on truth. A future where the inner child you once buried walks beside you, not as a ghost of grief, but as a source of joy, creativity, and authenticity. And here's the final, liberating truth. You never had a childhood, but you still have a future. That child inside you doesn't need to stay trapped in the past. They can come home to the present. They can laugh again, play again, rest again. They can finally experience what they were always meant to. Safety, belonging, love. But it won't come from waiting for someone else to rescue you. No one is coming to save that child. No one is coming to undo what was done. The rescue has always been in your hands. You are the one who must go back, take their hand, and whisper the words they've been waiting to hear. You didn't deserve that. You were just a child. You get to rest now. That is the essence of shadow work. Not bypassing the pain, not covering it with platitudes, but facing it, holding it, and transforming it. It's brutal. It's raw. But it's also the doorway to becoming whole. So if you are someone who grew up too fast, hear this. Your strength was never the problem. The problem was that you had no choice, but now you do. You can choose softness. You can choose rest. You can choose to stop carrying the weight of everyone else's emotions and finally carry your own truth. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in your life, you'll take a deep breath and realize you're not broken. You're finally becoming whole. Because healing doesn't mean rewriting the past. It means writing the future differently. And this time, it's your story,